Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribe and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. Before this dramatized story starts, pay attention to one detail that matters more than the wine. Public disrespect almost never begins in public. It starts in the small private moments when one partner talks over you, edits your feelings, and treats your calm like weakness. If somebody only values you when they think you can elevate their image, that is not pressure talking. That is belief. And once contempt gets comfortable, love starts leaving the room long before either person says out loud. If you have ever watched someone mistake quiet strength for weakness, stay with the story until the end. And while you are here, like this video, share with somebody who has lived through public disrespect, and subscribe for more relationship drama stories with real consequences and unforgettable reveals. My wife poured Cabernet over my suit in the middle of a ballroom full of developers, bankers, and city officials, and the strange part was not the heat in my face. It was how cold I felt after. The wine came down from my shoulder to my cuff in a dark red sheet, dripping onto the polished floor of a hotel on the Chicago River, where she was supposed to celebrate the biggest deal of her career. A quartet near the back faltered so badly, the violinist stopped altogether. For half a second, nobody moved. Then the phones came up. That was the sound I remember most. Cases clicking open. People are preparing to witness my humiliation. Now, maybe you understand what irrelevance feels like. My wife, Imani Rhodes Beckett, sat into the hush, still holding the empty glass by the stem. She was beautiful in that severe way that made strangers sit straighter around her. Copper silk gown, hair pinned high, diamond studs that caught the chandelier light like sparks. We had been married 8 years. I had learned how to read her by the smallest things. The way her right eyebrow lifted when she thought someone beneath her was speaking too long. The way she rolled her ring against the base of her finger when she was trying not to explode. That night, she was not trying very hard. I could have snatched the microphone from her hand. I could have told every person in that room exactly who I was, and exactly whose money was sitting under the foundation of her precious $350 million redevelopment deal. I did not. That was the first choice I made that night. I made it because rage is loud, and loud men give people permission to forget what was done to them. I wanted everyone to sit in what she had done, without me helping her blur it into a mutual scene. So I took my pocket square, wiped my jaw, and looked at her long enough for her smile to start shaking. Somebody near the front laughed the nervous laugh people use when they still hope a disaster is entertainment. I turned and stepped down from the stage. My shoes left wet half-moons on the black floor runner. I heard one of Imani's vice presidents whisper, "Lord," under her breath. I heard a waiter ask another waiter for soda water. I heard Imani call my name once, not softly, but not with love either. More like she was annoyed I had chosen to leave with dignity, instead of staying there to help her finish crushing me. By the time the elevator doors closed, my hands were finally trembling. I tucked them into my pockets, so I would not have to watch it. Outside, late October had sharpened the air. The river smelled metallic, and the wind off Lake Michigan slid right through my damp shirt. I stood under the awning while valets ran in fitted black coats and women in heels pressed one hand against their hair to keep it from lifting. My driver, Curtis, pulled up in the old graphite Lexus I kept for nights when I did not want attention. He stepped out, saw my jacket, and stopped himself before asking the wrong question. "Home," he said. I looked back once at the lit windows above us and told him, "Not yet." I was not ready for the walls. I was ready for a memory. I met Imani in June, 6 years before that ballroom, at a community planning meeting in Bronzeville. So hot, the folding chairs felt warm before you even sat down. I had come straight from a site visit in work boots and a navy polo, carrying my father's old brass drafting compass in my pocket the way some men carry a lucky coin. She stood near a foam board map of a vacant corridor and argued with 3 neighborhood residents and a deputy commissioner at the same time, not raising her voice, just making everybody else feel late. She had this habit of flattening a paper program against her thigh when she wanted to think. I noticed that first. Then I noticed everything else. After the meeting, I bought her a lemonade from a church youth table because the air conditioning had gone out and everybody looked half melted. She thanked me, took one sip, and said, "You were the only person there who understood the drainage problem." That was her version of flirting. I liked it immediately. She did not simper. She did not hunt for a safer thing to say. We walked down the block past a barber shop with gospel music floating through a screen door and a corner store selling loose socks and incense. She told me she wanted to build spaces black families could see themselves in without making them feel studied. I believed her. Back then, she was still the kind of ambitious that looked clean from a distance. Long nights, sketch rolls under the arm, coffee breath, cheap hoops, and sneakers tucked into her tote after meetings because she refused to limp home in heels. She talked fast when she was excited and very slowly when she was wounded, as though slowing down could keep the hurt from getting loose. On Sundays, if she stayed at my place in Hyde Park, she would steal the brown edges off my mother's sweet potato waffles before I sat down. She said the edges held all the honesty. I did not know then how much she valued the appearance of honesty more than the thing itself. My own life looked plain if you did not know what to ask. I told people I worked in engineering, asset review, and land use strategy, which was true. It just was not the whole truth. After my father died, I inherited a tired industrial maintenance company and a mess of partnerships nobody in our family trusted. Over the next decade, I built it into Beckett Meridian Holdings, mostly through subsidiaries and operating partners, because I like leverage more than applause, and because privacy had saved me from a lot of false affection. By the time I met Imani, I had controlling interests in logistics, infrastructure, and development firms across 3 states. I did not lead with that. That was the second choice that changed everything, though I did not understand it then. I did not tell her the full scope of what I owned, because I wanted one corner of my life where money was not the first language spoken. I had dated women who heard family office and immediately started talking about price tags. Imani seemed different. She seemed hungry in a way that was tied to work, not luxury. I told myself withholding detail was caution, not deception. Years later, sitting in that ballroom with wine dry on my skin, I had to admit it was also vanity. I wanted to be loved for being underestimated, and then discovered, the first time she embarrassed me, it was small enough to excuse. We were at a mixer in the West Loop with architects, contractors, and city planners. A partner asked what I did, and before I could answer, Imani laughed and said, "Doria makes spreadsheets behave." People smiled. I smiled too. It was not the word so much as a tone, like my work existed mainly to keep her kind of work funded and tidy. In the cab home, I said, "You do not have to shrink me to sound large." She stared out the window and told me I was being sensitive. I let that be the end of it because I was in love, and because love makes poor editors. I kept letting things be the end of it. When she corrected the way I told stories at dinner parties. When she rolled her eyes if I ordered catfish at a place she considered beneath us. When she introduced me as my husband, he's brilliant with numbers, to people whose respect she wanted. Even after I had told her twice I was not her supporting slide deck, there was always a reason. She was tired. She was stressed. She had spent too many years fighting to be taken seriously as a black woman in rooms run by men who smile with only half their faces. I understood that fight. I let her turn me into collateral for it. My mother saw the shift before I did. Mothers often do. One August Sunday after service in South Shore, we were standing outside New Hope Baptist, while women in white gloves packed pound cake in a foil, and kids chased each other between parked sedans. My mother, Laverne, straightened my tie and said, "That woman loves your steadiness, but she resents needing it." I laughed because I did not want to hear her. Mama kept her hand on my chest and added, "There are people who treat peace like an insult. Do not marry someone who thinks your calm is permission." I married Imani the following spring anyway. Some warnings only make sense in the rearview mirror. We got married in early May under a tent behind a cultural center on the south side with peonies blowing sideways in the wind and my cousin missing his cue on the trumpet. It was not lavish, just beautiful. My Aunt Oretta fried chicken for the rehearsal dinner in church pans and insisted that all our out-of-town guests take leftovers whether they wanted them or not. Imani cried during our vows. So did I. When she said, "You are the one place I did not have to perform," I believed every word. That line stayed with me for years, and maybe that was part of the problem. I kept loving the version of her that said it. The first 2 years were good in the ordinary ways people overlook. We argued about throw pillows and grocery lists, and whether jazz should ever be played before 10 in the morning. We took the Metro down to visit my mother. We ate late breakfast at a diner near 47th, where the cook called everybody baby, and the grits came with too much butter unless you stopped him. I restored old radios in my basement workshop on weekends, and Imani would sit on the stairs with her laptop, asking my opinion on facades and public plazas. She still cared what I thought then. Or maybe she cared that I gave my thoughts freely. Success changed the temperature of our house 1 degree at a time. Her firm, Rhodes Atelier, won a string of municipal contracts, then a museum renovation, then a school campus redesign that landed her in magazines she used to buy from the airport newsstand. The more attention she got, the more carefully she organized her life to look like attention belonged there. She began lining lipstick tubes in her bathroom drawer by shade and price. She sent back perfectly good food at restaurants because the presentation felt lazy. She stopped laughing with her whole body. Even her compliments grew strategic. "You always know how to be useful," she told me once, and I sat there pretending it sounded kind. Meanwhile, Beckett Meridian kept growing quietly. I bought into Northvale Urban Partners through 2 intermediary entities after a messy acquisition in St. Louis, then folded it under our redevelopment arm. Publicly, Northvale had its own CEO, a sharp woman named Celia Penn whom I trusted. Privately, major decisions still came to me. By then I had learned that most people hear whatever confirms their hierarchy. Imani heard me say I was an engineering review and assumed I was a well-paid, somewhat dull technical man with family money and no appetite for center stage. I could have corrected her assumption at any point. I kept waiting for her curiosity to do the work first. It never did. She asked strangers better questions than she asked me. She could sit at a donor dinner and make a retired judge talk about his grandmother's garden inside 10 minutes. But if I started explaining a freight corridor acquisition or tax increment structure, her eyes went glossy. "Give me the kindergarten version," she would say, then check her phone before I finished the second sentence. I told myself that marriage did not require symmetrical curiosity, that people can love each other unevenly in certain areas and still be safe. That was another lie I fed myself because the alternative meant admitting I was lonely in my own home. There were still bright pockets. Christmas at my mother's house with dominoes smacking the table and aunties arguing about pound cake texture. Summer drives down Lakeshore when the city looks rinsed clean after rain. The way Imani would still reach for my hand in her sleep after a 14-hour day. Those moments kept me bargaining against my own discomfort. Then the bright pockets got smaller. She started taking calls on the balcony during dinner. She missed my cousin's barbershop grand reopening because the room would not be useful. She called my church friends your sentimental committee one night, and I laughed even though it scorched me. Shame does that. It makes you laugh with the person wounding you. The deal that finally finished us began as a former freight yard on the edge of Bronzeville. 40 acres of rusted fencing, scrub grass, and broken concrete nobody could agree how to fix without pushing out the people who had survived everybody else's plans. Northvale was putting together financing, environmental remediation, and vertical development. The package was valued at $350 million. Imani wanted Rhodes Atelier to lead design and community experience. She talked about it for months like it was not a project but a coronation. "This will put me in a different room," she said one night, wrapping sea moss gel into her hair at the bathroom sink. Northvale's public team handled negotiations, not me. Celia met with Imani's people. Our legal group traded draft language. A community advisory council was formed, including clergy, block club presidents, and the head of a youth boxing gym that had been on that corridor longer than any developer. I watched the process closely, more closely once I saw how eagerly Imani promised things she had not yet cost. She spoke the language of inclusion beautifully, sometimes beautifully enough to hide when she was shaving away substance to keep her timeline. That was one of her gifts. She knew how to make urgency sound like virtue. At home, she treated the deal like my silence was part of the furniture. She would pace our kitchen in silk pajamas, phone tucked between shoulder and ear, saying things like, "Celia understands scale," or "Northvale finally has a grown-up capital behind it," and never once asked whether I had thoughts. I had many thoughts. I knew where the financing was solid and where it was fragile. I knew which neighborhood promises were non-negotiable for me because my father had worked that industrial belt before his knees gave out. I knew the land trust my aunt helped manage needed an easement preserved or the whole thing would poison community trust from the start. I waited. One evening in February, I came home to find a set of renderings spread across our dining table and Imani halfway through a glass of Sancerre. She looked up and said, "Tell me honestly, does this feel world-class?" I studied the sketches. They were elegant and expensive and suspiciously thin on the parts where people actually live their lives. Too much glass. Too little shade. Retail that would price out anyone whose grandmother still bought detergent from the corner store. "It feels impressive," I said. "That is not the same as rooted." She rolled the stem of her glass between two fingers and said, "This is why I do not bring work to you. You always drag your conscience like it is a line item." A week later, Celia called me after a due diligence session and said, "I need your eyes on something." I drove to our offices near the Loop before sunrise, carrying diner coffee and the same brass compass I still rubbed with my thumb when I was thinking. The issue was not criminal, just slippery. Rhodes Atelier's diversity participation numbers had been presented as commitments already secured when several smaller black-owned subcontractors had only been approached informally. One church-affiliated parcel that needed community consultation had been labeled low resistance. I stared at that phrase for a long time. My Aunt Oretta's name was on the advisory list. So was my father's old foreman. That day I made another decision that could have gone differently. I could have killed the deal quietly right then and blamed the risk. Nobody outside a handful of us would have known why. Instead, I instructed Celia to slow the timeline, tighten review, and give Rhodes Atelier a chance to correct the representations. I did that because some part of me still wanted my wife to choose integrity when she had room to choose it. I also did it because I did not want the corridor punished for her ego. People in Bronzeville had already seen enough big dreams arrive with polished shoes and leave with their trust folded inside somebody else's briefcase. I tried talking to her 3 nights later. We were in our kitchen. Rain tapped the windows. I was slicing peaches for a salad while she stood at the island, answering emails with that clipped impatience she reserved for people who needed something from her. I said, "Your team needs to clean up the vendor language before Northvale signs anything." She did not even look up. I know what my team needs. I set the knife down. Then hear me anyway. She finally raised her head and smiled that thin smile that meant danger. "Dorian, you are not in this room. You are adjacent to this room. Please stop confusing proximity with power." I went silent after that. But silence is not the same thing as surrender. I began documenting. Emails, meeting notes, revised commitments. I also began noticing how casually she used my background when it served her. At small investor lunch, she referenced my husband's family roots in industrial labor to soften concerns about displacement, though she had not asked me if she could. When I confronted her later, she said, "I was honoring your father." I wanted to tell her honor without consent is just theft in a nicer jacket. Instead, I stood in our mudroom staring at her coat hanging beside mine and felt something in me get tired enough to become clear. By September, the strain had settled into the house like dust. We did not scream often. That would have almost felt healthy. We specialized in small cuts. She would ask if I planned to wear that to an event. I would say I had meetings and slept at Hyde Park instead of the condo by the river. She began taking more solo trips for client cultivation. I spent more evenings in my basement workshop, restoring a walnut-case Philco radio that had belonged to my grandfather. The tuning dial kept sticking between stations, and I became obsessed with getting it right. There was comfort in machinery. Parts either fit or they did not. Marriage was less honest. The gala invitation arrived embossed and overconfident. Celebration of vision. Bronzeville Forward Initiative. Black tie. Imani placed it on the counter beside my coffee and said without preamble, "I would prefer it if you skipped this one." I looked up from the newspaper. "Why?" She opened the fridge, took out berries, and answered like she was discussing the weather. "Because every conversation matters, and I do not need you being grim in a room that requires lightness." I sat there with a spoon in my hand and understood, finally, that she was not worried I would embarrass her. She was worried I would remind people she had a husband who could not be curated. I told her I was coming. That was another decision I made deliberately. I could have stayed home and spared myself the scene. I went because absence would have let her narrate me as unsupportive, bitter, small. I was none of those things. I also went because something in my spirit needed one clean answer. Not about the deal, about us. When a marriage gets sick, you spend years collecting half evidence. A softened apology here. A good holiday there. A rough quarter blamed for rough behavior. I went to that ballroom because I was tired of living on inference. I wanted the truth to have nowhere left to hide. The hotel smelled like orchids, polish, and expensive liquor trying to pass as celebration. Men from city agencies stood with women from philanthropy circles under giant black and gold banners, featuring renderings of playgrounds, affordable housing towers, and smiling children who did not yet know they were being used as mood boards. Imani moved through the room like she had rehearsed each turn of her shoulder. She kissed cheeks, touched elbows, and laughed one note too high. When she reached me, her mouth smiled, but her eyes did not. "Please," she said under her breath, "do not drift into anything earnest tonight." I said, "That has never been my talent." She replied, "No, remaining small has." I stayed near the back through the speeches. Celia gave measured remarks about responsibility and long-term stewardship. A pastor from the advisory council spoke about keeping elders in place. Then Imani took the stage, and the room changed shape around her the way it always did. She was gifted. I will not lie about that. She could take steel, soil, transit, memory, and ambition and braid them into a narrative that made people see themselves inside a future they could not afford. At first, she was all grace. Then someone at our table asked where her husband was, and a few heads turned. She spotted me. Her mouth tightened. That was the hinge. "There he is," she said into the microphone, laughter smooth but brittle. "My husband made it after all." Dorian specializes in restraint, sometimes to a fault. A few people chuckled. I did not move. She kept going. If this project had been left to him, we would still be studying drainage patterns and debating whether joy was too expensive. More laughter. Then she called me up front. I should have refused. Instead, I walked there slowly, because refusing would look like fear, and I was done performing fear for her comfort. When I reached the stage, she leaned close enough for her perfume to cut through the wine on her breath and whispered, "Try not to look bewildered." She spoke into the microphone again. "Dorian is a good man. Very thoughtful. Very careful. He believes in caution, the way some people believe in religion." That line got a stronger laugh. She lifted her glass toward me and said, "To the men who keep the books while the rest of us build the future." I finally said, quietly but into the mic, "Imani, enough?" Not angry, just flat. That one sentence embarrassed her more than if I had shouted, because it implied boundaries, and contempt hates boundaries. Her jaw set. "Do not correct me on my night," she said, and before I could step back, she tipped the glass over my chest. Red, cold, deliberate. After I left the hotel, I did not go home. I went to the Northvale office, where only the cleaning crew and one analyst were left. Celia was already there. She had seen the clips before I arrived. She took one look at me, handed me a folded gray sweatshirt from the company gym, and said, "You do not have to decide tonight." I put it on over my stained shirt and sat in the conference room where the skyline looked like a row of lit teeth. Then I decided anyway. Not out of revenge. Out of governance. Pause the closing. I told her. Effective immediately. We need to conduct review, community integrity review, and representation audit. The next morning, the video was everywhere. Morning talk radio joked about the riverfront Merlot marriage. Business blogs were less funny. They asked whether a lead design executive who publicly humiliated her spouse at an official celebration had the judgment to steward a project requiring years of public trust. Northvale released a brief statement about reviewing recent developments and recommitting to ethical partnership standards. Nobody named me. Nobody needed to. Imani called 13 times before noon. I let the phone ring while I sat Harold's, pushing eggs around a plate and listening to two electricians at the next booth discuss whether the whole thing looked staged. Chicago can smell performance through concrete. Over the next 2 weeks, consequences arrived the way real consequences do. By memo, by silence, by people suddenly rereading what they had been too dazzled to read before. Northvale's council requested revisions. The community council asked harder questions. One subcontractor came forward privately and said Rhodes Atelier had used his company logo in presentation before he had signed a single agreement. A church trustee called my Aunt Loretta in tears because someone from Imani's office had implied their parcel might face condemnation if they did not stop slowing progress. My aunt called me and said, "Baby, I know this is your wife, but that girl is moving like nobody taught her the difference between urgency and greed." Imani showed up at the Hyde Park house on a Sunday afternoon while I was fixing the dial string on the Philco radio. She did not knock. She came in with sunglasses on and a press statement folded in her fist, so tightly it looked damp. "You let them do this to me," she said. "Not hello. Not how you are." I stood there with solder on my fingers and asked, "Who are they?" She laughed once, sharp. "Do not play quiet with me right now." Her voice echoed down the hallway past our wedding photo, the one where she had her forehead against mine, and both of us still looked like we trusted tomorrow. I asked her to sit. She refused. She paced between my workbench and the back door, taking off her sunglasses, putting them back on, then off again. She was furious. But underneath it I saw something else for the first time in months. Fear. Celia Penn will not return my calls directly. Their counsel is interrogating line items like they are trying to build a case. The advisory council has gone cold. My board thinks I am toxic, all because of one bad night. I wiped my hands on a rag and said, "No, not one bad night. One bad night that finally matched what your private behavior has been saying for years." She stared at me like I had slapped her. "You are enjoying this," she said. That hurt, because it touched the part of me I mistrusted. There was satisfaction in seeing the spell break. I will not pretend otherwise. But enjoyment was too simple a word for what I felt. I felt grief with structure. I felt vindication wrapped in shame. I felt angry that the woman I loved had become someone who could watch herself degrade me and still think the real injury was what came back to her. "I am not enjoying this," I said. "I am no longer protecting you from the natural consequences of your choices." She laughed again, and this time it sounded closer to breaking than mockery. 3 days later, during a formal review, one of our attorneys asked Rhodes Atelier for updated beneficial ownership acknowledgments and capstack familiarity confirmations. That is how Imani found out. Not from gossip, not from a reveal staged for theater. From paperwork, as most serious truths arrive. My name was not on Northvale's front page, but was there 3 levels up through Beckett Meridian, cross-referenced under managing control. Celia called me after the meeting and said she went white. I sat at my desk, looking at the brass compass of my father, and felt my stomach sink instead of rise. Discovery did not feel triumphant. It felt like the last plank coming off a bridge. She came to my downtown office that evening because now she understood which building mattered. Security called upstairs. I told them to send her in. When she entered, she did not look enraged this time. She looked reorganized by shock. "You own Northvale," she said. No greeting. No accusation, not yet. Just a sentence she was trying to hear out loud in her own voice. "Yes," I said. Her eyes moved around the room then, finally taking what she had ignored about me for years. The original land surveys on the wall, the framed for expansion photos, the municipal awards of my family name, the quiet expense of restraint. "How long?" she asked. "Controlling stake?" "For years." Indirect influence before that. She sat down hard, like her knees had lost faith in her. And you let me walk into negotiations with your company without telling me. I leaned back and answered honestly. I told you what I did for a living many times. You never listened past the part that sounded ordinary. She covered her mouth with one hand. That is cruel. Cruel? I said. Cruel was standing under a chandelier and pouring wine on me because you thought there would be no cost. Cruel was using my family's labor history in your pitch without asking. Cruel was treating my dignity like bad branding. She lowered her hand, and something defensive hardened again. So this is punishment. No, I said. Punishment is emotional. This is fiduciary. The project requires trust, truthful representations, and a lead partner who does not bully community institutions behind closed doors. Her eyes narrowed. You spoke to Oretta. I did not need to. Your team did enough talking on its own. That was when she stopped performing for a second and said the truest thing she had said in months. I was trying to keep momentum. Everybody punishes black firms for one imperfection and forgives white firms for 10. That is true, I said. It still does not turn manipulation into leadership. She cried then, but not neatly, not movie tears, the kind that interrupt breathing and make a person angry at their own face. I worked for this, she said. I worked and worked and worked. I was never born into rooms like this. I almost reached for her. Reflex is powerful. Instead, I held my own wrist with my other hand until the urge passed. I know you worked, I said. I also know what work turns into when you decide being disrespected by the world gives you permission to disrespect the people who love you. She looked at me for a long time, and I watched understanding arrive in pieces that were too small to comfort either of us. Her board removed her as lead executive the next week, though they kept Rhodes Atelier attached in a reduced role until the audit finished. I did not ask for her company to be destroyed. That mattered to me. Good people worked there, young designers, administrative staff, a receptionist named Monique, who always remembered my coffee order even after Monty stopped inviting me upstairs. We restructured the deal so another design firm could absorb portions of the work without gutting the community benefits. Some people call me soft for that. Maybe I was. But scorched earth would have punished secretaries, interns, and field coordinators for their boss's contempt. I had already lived inside somebody else's collateral logic. I was done with it. The divorce conversation happened in our house on a Tuesday morning while sleet clicked against the windows. We sat at the long oak table we had bought from a craftsman in Indiana when we still shopped for permanence together. She had no lawyer with her yet. I had mine on standby in another room and did not bring her in. Is this the part where you tell me I never knew you? Imani asked. I looked at her hands. No rings. Short nails for the first time in years. No, I said, this is the part where I tell you I knew enough. Enough to understand I cannot stay married to someone who mistakes my restraint for lack of worth. She nodded once, then surprised me. I think I did know, she said. Not your company. Not the money. You. I knew you were bigger than the box I put you in. I just liked the box because it kept me from feeling small beside you. That was the sentence I had waited years for and no longer had any use for. I thanked her anyway because honesty, even late honesty, deserves to be marked. We divided property. The river condo went on sale. She kept her grandmother's piano and the art she had collected before me. I kept the Hyde Park house, the radios, my father's compass, and the quiet that came after she moved out. In June, months after the gala, I saw her from across a neighborhood groundbreaking for a library annex on the south side. She was there as a consultant for a smaller firm, dressed simply, hair pulled back, no entourage orbiting her. She looked older, not in the face exactly, but in the shoulders, less armored. She saw me too. For a second I thought she might walk over. Instead, she gave a small nod. I returned it. That was all. Nearby, kids were eating rainbow ice from paper cups, and a city bus hissed at the curb while a man on the corner sold incense and phone chargers from a folding table. Life had not paused for our collapse. It rarely does. The Philco radio finally worked that summer. I got the dial to settle cleanly on a jazz station just as evening rain moved through Hyde Park and drummed against the back steps. I sat in the workshop listening to trumpet and static braid together and thought about how close love can stand contempt before one of them wins. People say humiliation changes a person in an instant. That is not exactly true. Public humiliation only exposes the slow private erosion that was already there. By the time the wine hit my suit, our marriage had been cracking for years. The spill just made the fracture visible enough that neither of us could keep calling it weather. She poured wine on the wrong man, but the real lesson was never about revenge. It was about what happens when contempt replaces love and respect leaves the room. If this story pulled you in, like this video, share it, and subscribe for more powerful first-person relationship stories with betrayal, suspense, and unforgettable endings. What stayed with me in this story was not the reveal that Dorian owned the company. It was a chain of smaller moments before it. You are adjacent to this room, the church parcel labeled low resistance, and the choice to leave the stage instead of turning humiliation into a duel. That is how boundaries usually work in real life. They are not loud. They are late, often later than they should be, and they still matter. Respect cannot survive where contempt is treated like stress relief, and silence only protects a relationship when both people are using it to listen. The end.